Hey, welcome to Watch Candy. Thank you so much for being here. I'm super excited for today because I get to talk about my vintage watch collection. And I don't want to speak for you guys just yet, but I think you're gonna like what I've got. To add a bit of a preface to this video, I am relatively new at collecting vintage watches. I've only had vintage watches for a couple years, so I know I've got a lot to learn and I'm willing to acknowledge that for you guys. I also want to point out that when I typically shop for vintage watches, I'm not going for a specific model or brand even, or reference number or specific dial types, or all those little niche things that vintage watch collectors really get into. And depending on the budget that I've got, I don't super care if it even has like an original handset or dial or anything. I usually just buy vintage watches simply for the sake of the vintage thing, the feeling of having history on your wrist. That being said, I do like to have a fairly diverse collection, so I like to have watches from a wide array of decades. And honestly, for most of these, I only have a super rough estimate on when it was made based on the design. So without further ado, let's jump in and see what a Gen Z's vintage watch collection looks like. Starting off very strong, this is the first vintage watch I ever bought. This is a skin diver from Vantage. And Vantage, if you don't know, is kind of like Hamilton's younger sibling. The history for me is a bit fuzzy, but to my understanding, Vantage was created as a kind of budget Hamilton, similar to how Caravelle is to Bulova. But that doesn't mean this isn't a solid watch. I believe it's from somewhere around the 60s, and something that's really cool about this watch is the very small proportions despite the diver style. It's only 31 millimeters wide, and including the domed crystal, it's 10 millimeters thick. The expanding bracelet that I have it on isn't an original bracelet, but it pairs very well with the watch, so I just can't bring myself to take it off. But what really brings the most character to this watch, at least in my eyes, is the way the lume has patinaed over time. You have that signature golden tan color on those numerals, which still do glow faintly, by the way. And the hour and minute hand, which I'm sure at one point was re-lumed because it doesn't match the rest of the lume, but those have a gray milky color to them, which is really interesting, as opposed to the second hand, which I assume has the original lume, which will match the golden tan of those numerals. But adding a nice pop of color is the way the lume at 12 o'clock on the bezel has changed to a gorgeous orange color. It's got a cute little manually wound movement, and the bezel is friction based, and as you can see is more about timing as opposed to diving increments. I'm really happy with that little Vantage. It's not going anywhere, especially since it was my first vintage watch I ever bought. But I also did buy this watch and the next one from a dear friend who has a shop who's local to me, which transitions perfectly into the next watch. This is my Zodiac Senator. Now, Zodiac is a brand that definitely seems to have a little bit of a bad luck streak. To my understanding, before the quartz crisis, it was actually a really strong brand, with models like the Super Seawolf being in direct competition to the Rolex Submariner. Now, I don't know if Fossil revived them from the dead or if they just kept the brand alive, but they are who currently own Zodiac, and in the present era, they did have another pretty solid run. Now I'm hearing lots of talk about Fossil as a group being bankrupt, and now Zodiac is starting to fall because of that. So it's really sad because the brand is actually quite good. I just hope the best for them, really. But I'm glad to own a little piece of their history. This is actually a ladies' piece, but the proportions are fantastic. As you can see, it actually has a more oval case shape, with one of the most beautifully finished bezels I've seen on just about any watch. This watch has a gorgeous automatic movement inside, and I believe it comes from around the 70s, and I think a lot of that is shown in those indexes. Those are very 70s style. Another interesting feature about this watch is that instead of pulling the crown to the first position and turning to change the date, you actually push the crown in and the date snaps to the next day. It is very satisfying to use. With the proportions at the narrowest point, you're at about 32 millimeters wide, with a case thickness including that crystal at about 10.1 millimeters, and a lug-to-lug of 37.6 millimeters. Next is this absolute banger of a watch. This is my vintage Yema. And in case you weren't aware, Yema is actually a French brand. To my knowledge, was a casualty of the quartz crisis, but has been since revived and actually makes some really interesting pieces. However, nothing quite as interesting as this one right here. If I were to guess, this one is from the late 60s to the early 70s and has a very striking case design. It's square but trapezoidal at the same time, but it's got a little bit of raise to it, almost like a pyramid. It's very geometric and very almost brutalist in design. I actually found this watch at an antique store in a little town near London called Dorking. It was just down the street from where the Airbnb was that my family and I were staying in, and it's one of my most favorite keepsakes from that trip. It has a good manually wound movement inside of it, and interestingly enough, does not have a seconds hand. But what really added the cherry on top to this whole adventure buying this watch was the fact that the antique shop was only asking £55 for it, which is about $75 as of recording this video. And although I'm sure this isn't the original strap for it, I think it was a fantastic pairing. And I actually did have to have a local cobbler punch in a couple extra holes, which kind of adds to the story and the local tie-in. I am definitely never getting rid of this one either. From 3 absolute bangers to one that's kind of a dud, this is my Seiko alarm watch. Obviously, this watch by design is very, very 70s, but unfortunately, it is currently not running, although the alarm does work. It's definitely not the highest quality vintage watch in my collection. This is the original bracelet to it as well, which is fun. Like I said, it doesn't work, but it was under $100, so I'm happy to just hold on to it, especially just as a collector's piece. So although I never wear this watch and honestly hardly ever look at it, I am kind of happy I have it. I don't know anything about the brand, but who knows, maybe one day I'll get this guy fixed. Next, I have this Zenith pocket watch, and I honestly wasn't even sure if I was gonna feature it on this video, but ultimately I decided to have it because it is special to me. It's the only pocket watch I own, and I just think it is so cool. I adore the numerals on it. I don't know if they're even original to the watch or not, but something like this was something I just had to have, and it was at a really good price too. It does run and it keeps excellent time. It does have a really pretty movement, and the dial itself, I believe, is porcelain. I used to just sit and stare at this watch's movement, which is easily accessible through the screw-on case back. Slight tangent here, but I do think all watch collectors who enjoy collecting watches for historical sake should own a pocket watch. I know it's not something a lot of people even consider, but pocket watches were a massive part of watch history, and there's so many on the market to be had at really good prices. I consider it a part of my curated historical collection. For the last 3 watches, we've actually got watches that have all been featured in one way or another on my channel before, starting off with this tiny little Seiko. I actually wear this watch all the time because of how small it is, at 18.8 millimeters wide, about 7 millimeters thick, and a relative lug to lug of 22 millimeters. It is easily the tiniest watch I have in my collection, but that makes it very comfortable. I often sleep in this. It's perfect for just lounging around. I like to wear it as I edit, and it's good for just about everything you do around the house except for like washing dishes. This was a pretty awesome eBay find. I think I paid about $35 for it, and it is a manually wound movement. Again, this watch has some very strong 70s design language to it, so that's when I assume it's from. Next, I've got this Gruen bumper automatic. I got this watch purely because of the movement. I think the bumper movement is really fun to wear, and it's such a cool little sliver of watchmaking history that I had to have one. Gruen is a pretty well-known vintage American brand, and I believe this particular one is from about the 50s. It has a very strong but very pretty patina on the dial, and some very unique lugs. Of course, the star of the show is the bumper movement, which is super fun to wear because you can feel the little thud the movement makes as it goes back and forth, and it's just a constant reminder of the history behind this watch. This watch definitely is not fully original, I know that for a fact. as the strap is completely new, the crystal eye had replaced, and the handset were either replacements that were fairly ill-fitting or the original that just kind of got a little bit beat up. But when I first had this watch, I actually had to go in and manually bend up the minute hand because it was curved downward and would often catch on the second hand as it swept over the subdial. So it was a tiny bit of a project watch, but I think that's really fun because now I can say that I helped bring it back to life. I actually wear that watch every Sunday. To me, Sunday is like a golden vintage day, and this watch captures that vibe perfectly. Last and certainly not least is a watch that is new, at least to me. This is my Wittnauer piece. I actually did a whole video unboxing this watch, so if you haven't seen that, go check it out after this video. But this watch is just fun. I adore everything about it. The bracelet has a really cool hatched design. The crystal is very, very domed. The dial, again, has very heavy patina, but to me is very pretty. And an unexpected feature on this watch is the engraving on the case back with lovely old English script and the letters RAS. Of course, I have no idea what that means, but the mystery and story behind it is what really makes it fun. And the manually wound movement has been recently serviced, so it's just a huge win all around, especially for something, again, I think I paid about $60, $70 for it. And it came in its original box. So there you have it. That is my full vintage watch collection. I absolutely plan on getting more. I love collecting vintage pieces. Like I said, I hope to have one from every decade, even going into newer eras of neo-vintage pieces. So tell me what you thought of my collection. In my opinion, this is a really interesting and unique collection. So I'm curious to see what you thought. Which one was your favorite? I'd love to know. Was there anything particular Gen Z about my collection? I would love to know all of your thoughts. Thank you so much again for watching this video, and I will see you next time.